Two, check. Hello. Hello. What is up? What is up, friends? Hello. How's it going? Looking fresh. Thank you, Moss. Thank you, Phil. A haircut you could set your watch to. That's what we say. That's what they say. How's it going, folks? I hope you're feeling well. Honestly, I'm not. I had a pretty bad night. I had a bad night of sleep. I felt pretty bad. I felt pretty shitty when I woke up this morning, but I do feel like there's been some improvement. I took a shower. I was outside. It's a beautiful, beautiful day today. I was outside. I got a bit of fresh air. Feeling a little bit cleared up, but still I feel pretty sick, but maybe possibly on the mend. I don't know. We'll see. We will see. Turning the corner. We're going to see. Well, I don't know. I don't want to get too ahead of myself here. I did think about just like taking the day off because I was feeling pretty bad. And I'm going to have to do a podcast later tonight. This may be a shorter one or I just don't want to talk so much. But at the same time, I was seeing all kinds of takes that were making me feel like I was losing my mind. And honestly, I kind of just wanted to be able to log on and talk about some of this stuff. Just play movies for class. I think we will kind of do that. We will do that. But there's a few things that I wanted to get off my chest as well. Plus, I promised that I would show up right after my haircut and you would see. And I intend to keep my promise. Okay? I'm someone that keeps their promises most of the time. Got a new do. That's right, fart party. That is right. That's absolutely correct. Anyway, we can just kind of chit-chat and hang out for a few moments before we get into the serious discourse. Because I got some discourse to get into. I think I'm quickly just going to... promises made, promises kept. Thank you. I think I'm just going to get a beverage. I made an iced coffee. I just had actually a really good tuna panini. I went and enjoyed that outside. Outside where I am right now, there's this little tiny little kind of park area. And it's a beautiful day. I sat outside and enjoyed my panini. I also got a really, really good almond croissant, which I ate like half of. I was hoping to save it till later, and I ate like half of it because it's so delicious. And I made an iced coffee, and I just drank the iced coffee. Because I didn't sleep very much, and my head still feels a little bit like it's like wrapped in a foam. It's like my ears and my sinuses are like stuffed with cotton or something. That's kind of how I feel right now. So I'm just going to grab a Kleenex. I'm going to grab a water. Okay? So don't go anywhere. I'm going to do that. I'm going to come back in a moment. We'll have some chit chat. We'll get into the serious discourse that I wanted to do. And then maybe I'll watch some kind of video content. And I don't know. Again, I'm not going to, even though I'm feeling a little bit better, I don't think I can do a full stream today. We'll see how it goes. Thank you, Brian. What's up? 1 second. I'll be right back.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
19 months to go. I can almost taste it. Who had asparagus?
Thank you, Brian, for the 5 months resub at tier 2. Thank you. 19 short months to go. Did you hear me blow my nose just now? Was that like really loud? I really have got all kinds of just... My whole face is just all gunk. I'm sorry. I'm sorry if you had to listen to that. I probably should have muted the microphone. Oh, it's refreshing. I heard nothing. Okay, that's good. Yeah, I gave quite a honk
there.
There.
Have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
6 months here, preparing for my golden shower.
Doc, thank you for the 18 months resub at tier 2. Every resub is just one month closer. This goes for everyone. 1 month closer to the highly elite, highly exclusive, golden TRRS 2-year sub badge. It's golden, it's prestigious, and that's all it is. That's just all it is. Hello, Ben. What's up? I had to do it. I had to get a cut. AI Cyberpunk, Rob. That's it. Oh, that's very refreshing. Very, very refreshing. I did play a bit of Cyberpunk 2077 last night, but like not on stream. I was just feeling pretty sick, and like even I guess it's probably unrealistic to stream every single hour that I play the game. Like maybe that's just not realistic. I guess it's not that much of a big deal to just turn on my camera when I'm playing, but I was just feeling sick last night and wanted to grind a little bit in there in the cyber world. So I did do that. I finished some of those taxi missions. I finished another few like side missions. Yeah, I am enjoying it. I am. Yeah. I am. And I was just like... Hold on. I think I gotta change the title here. Oh. Ugh. Change the title. Got a haircut. Got a haircut, that's right. Oh. I really don't know how much energy I have for this. I'm going to see if I'm going to try and power through it. I was feeling a lot more confident 25 minutes ago about being able to stream for any extended period today. We will see. I just logged on and thought you said tax emissions rather than taxi missions. Well, maybe we should tax emissions as well. That's what I call a sensible, moderate, market-based climate change solution. Right? And that's what this show is all about, is discussing these kinds of sensible approaches to politics. Market-based. Make sure it's market-based. You sick? Yes, I am. Yes, I am. I must admit that I am. But feeling a bit better. I was really in rough shape last night. I had a rough night of sleep. Felt pretty shitty this morning, but I guess I took some. If I took 2 Advil liquid gels this morning at like 8, it's almost 1. Can I take 2 more of those, you think? What's the time limit on that? That's a yes from the chat? Okay, that's good to know. I got a haircut not long ago, too. Very nice, Red Wizard. Very nice. I don't think it's 8 hours. I think it's 4. 4 to 6 hours. I think I'm good. I'm going to go take some more of those. Then I'm going to be ready to go. Ugh. Okay. Man. Those ibuprofen liquid gels are some good stuff, huh? It's the same kind of thing with the vaccines and everything. It's like, oh, you support Big Pharma. It's like, no, Big Pharma is really evil, but like, they do make pretty good medicine, though. Like, you can't really deny that. All the other evil things they do and the whole market element and, you know, pricing people out of important medication that they need to live, that's bad. But the actual medicine itself is like pretty good stuff sometimes. It's Fent. Yeah. Just popping synthetic opioids on the stream. I got the generics as well. Yeah. Ugh. So anyway, I was pretty just feeling bad last night. I've like avoided. I've talked about the sports this season, and I've just kind of avoided being as obsessed with the Toronto Raptors as I usually am this year, just because the vibes were really off, and in many ways the vibes in my own life were quite off as well, and I couldn't really handle the negativity this year. So I kind of checked out from the whole Toronto Raptors season, but I did want, they were in the play-in game. I really didn't, even with everything that's happened this year, I didn't really doubt that they would still get into the playoffs. And I watched the play-in game last night, and they pretty much, and their season ended in pretty much the most depressing fashion. It was the most depressing season in a while. Even the whole like Tampa Bay season you were able to write it off because it's like, well, they're not in Toronto. It's the pandemic. There's no crowds. It's just a whatever year. They're going to get a good draft pick, and they ended up getting Scotty Barnes. So even that really bad season had kind of like silver lining to it. Whereas this season, it's very hard to kind of make that argument. And so after a super depressing, bad vibes season, they blow a 19-point lead in the play-in game after looking great in the first half. Blow a 19-point lead, miss 18 free throws, and coughed up the play-in game to the Bulls, and ending their season. And we're just basically a laughingstock online because of DeMar DeRozan's daughter screaming during the free throws. and they're basically known as, they became like a meme, and that's basically the summation of the season. They lost because of a child in the stands who was yelling at them. So it was a very depressing end to a depressing season. So I was frustrated by that, and I'm also just like, it was a heck of a scream. I mean, they lose a one possession game in a game which they led by 20. They lose in a one possession game in a game that they missed 18 free throws. Like, it's just like really dumb. Like, it's like you have to like try. You have to like try to lose that. You know, that's really something else. I was looking forward even to just like, even, you know, a round one exit against the Bucks. You know, I was like, that'll be all right. Not great, but maybe they can take a game or two off the Bucks. You know, I think they're a pretty good team. They might be able to put together something and win a couple games, but now not even that. Now not even that. The season's just over. Personally, I blame China. That's right. I think they're doing some kind of interference. What happened? They had the game in the bag when I fell asleep. Well, that's the thing. I was watching it with my kid, and then I went to put him to bed like around the middle of the third quarter, and they were still winning by like 15. Took like 20 minutes to get him to go to sleep, and then I get up and they're up by, it's the fourth quarter and they're up by like 5. And I was like, God damn. And then at that point, you know, if you're a Toronto fan, if you're a fan of any Toronto sports franchise, you just know exactly what's going to happen at that point. And that's exactly what happened. That is exactly what happened. Ki Ravi, hello. It's okay. Don't worry about it. Anyway, it was just a depressing game. It was a depressing season. I'm sad that I'm so used to, and that's one thing, like weeness, you know, like I recognize too, as a fan of the Raptors, I've been pretty spoiled. It's been a straight decade of them like being good to very good every single year, which is a stretch that, including a championship as well. So that's a stretch that like not a lot of sports teams are ever really able to attain. So I do recognize that. I've been a fan of the team for a long time, so there's been many, many shitty years, and having this decade of solid play is something to fall back on. But it was still just a depressing way for the season to end, and I'm disappointed. I don't even get any playoff enjoyment. I might watch the odd playoff game, but I'm just completely checked out now. So I was kind of like, kind of feeling like just depressed about that, randomly depressed about that. And honestly, like there's discourse going on right now. We touched on it or actually we did a pretty deep dive into it on Monday, talking about Tibet and the Dalai Lama and everything. And just the discourse around that has shifted around that has just made me feel really alienated. And I see, like, so, you know, there's a whole thing with the Dalai Lama, right, where he basically was like sexually abusing a child in a video, which I think a lot of people like recognized was a horrible thing. And then, as I talked about on Monday, it kind of seemed like there was a little bit of a dam breaking of being like, well, what is the deal with this guy and like this whole system and what was going on in Tibet prior to the PRC? And I kind of felt like it was only these weirdos that were defending it. But then, so Boots Riley, the filmmaker, the director of Sorry to Bother You, and, you know, from the band The Coup as well, obviously, like a prominent, probably America's most prominent like socialist artist, essentially. Someone who's like an unapologetic communist and is like acknowledges that, and often defends, you know, of countries that are victims of imperialism, using his platform for that. And he shared a TikTok video about Tibet and the influence of the PRC in Tibet and the system that was in place before. We talked about all this on Monday. The like serf system, the slave society that was in place before that was like overthrown by the PLA. So he shared a TikTok about that, and the reaction from like I would say a significant number of the people that I'm like I follow on Twitter or have mutual follows with that are like socialists or whatever. A large number of people are just like, he's doing Boots Riley. Oh, but it's a big. He's doing imperialism. He supports Chinese colonialism. He supports Chinese imperialism. He thinks that it's okay for the Chinese to do imperialism in Tibet. And we can get into some of the specifics of these takes. But I just had a moment. I was just like, I kept seeing people say that kind of thing. All people that I've like I've followed for a while or whatever. And it just made me feel really alienated, seriously. Like I really realized the extent to which I think some of the ideas that we talk about on this stream are just like, even though I think we have the correct analysis and the correct viewpoint, I think are just still so unpopular, I realized. And for Boots Riley to share this TikTok of just factual information about the system in Tibet prior to the formation of the PRC and things like the connections with the Dalai Lama and the CIA and this kind of stuff. Just for sharing that, I saw all these people sharing these takes about how Boots Riley supports non-Western countries are allowed to do imperialism. Oh, you're allowed to do settler colonialism if you're doing if you say that you're communist and this kind of stuff. And I don't know. I kept seeing people, even people that I kind of like and respect, in some cases, weighing in on this with this kind of thing. And it just made me feel so fucking isolated. You know, I think we've talked about it before. One of the reasons that I think this community is like good, it's good for me, and I think it's good for people here, is because we feel this sense of alienation, and we kind of come together here and we can kind of talk about these viewpoints and try and like encourage this kind of understanding, and it feels less insane. But this and the whole last year of like Ukraine and everything, and the Ukraine-Russia thing has just been this barrage that I think has just beat me over the head with this idea that like we're so, in terms of this viewpoint that we talk about on this program, is so marginal and is so unpopular. You know, and it's just a depressing feeling. It is. You don't understand. Tibet would have surely transitioned into a liberal democracy and wouldn't have all been like Saudi Arabia or worse. Wouldn't have at all just been a puppet of the West for resources and NATO as a way to possibly invade China by removing a massive mountain barrier. We are the Goths. Well, that's the Emperor's New Clothes. I mean, that's kind of one of the big points here, right? Is people have this idea that there's some choice. Like Tibet is an example, but I think they view this is the kind of commonly held viewpoint that it's a choice between being part of the PRC or being some like sovereign, independent place where everyone gets what they want and everyone has freedom to have religion and all these different things, and everyone has democracy and everything's great. And that's just that's fantasy land. That's a fantasy version. If there was some situation where Tibet did leave the PRC, and that's the second question as well, which is like, is there actual appetite within Tibet for this? Like people say, listen to Tibetans. And like, which Tibetans are we listening to? Are we listening to like Tibetans who appear in our media as part of this like official NED-backed dissident group NGO complex? Like, is there actual appetite in Tibet to separate from the PRC, number one? And if there was, And I'm not even saying that there is, but if there was, would that lead to some would Tibet then become like a sovereign democracy with freedom of expression and religion and all this stuff? Or would it just become like Taiwan and like South Korea and like Japan, a like Western colony, essentially, which is used to encircle and destabilize China, which is the enemy of Western imperialism? So there's a whole lot of stuff about this conversation that I find very strange, the way we talk about this. You know, the listen to Tibetans thing. Well, do we want to listen to, as we talked about on Monday, do we want to listen to people in Tibet that are like, oh yeah, I actually remember what it was like prior to the PRC, and it's actually way significantly better now, and I'm actually quite happy with the situation. Do we want to hear from them? No, because when they say that, they say, they're being brainwashed. They're brainwashed automatons. There's all these fucking bizarre takes about how China is by raising living standards in Tibet and by building infrastructure, these massive infrastructure projects, they're like tricking Tibetans into liking them and to wanting to be part of their society. And it's like, how do you argue with that? What are you supposed to say to that? Like, you know, it's like they confuse people into being part of their own marginalization and subjugation. But how are they being subjugated, though? How are they being marginalized when their living standards are improving? When their living standards are improving and their infrastructure and all these things to become a modern society are all improving drastically. How are they being tricked into being part of their own self-marginalization by having their living standards increase and having poverty decrease and having these infrastructure projects built? It's honestly making me feel insane. It is making me feel insane. And we can get into more of these arguments. I would like to look at this TikTok that Boots Riley shared and then look at some of the responses to it and talk about this a bit more. Because honestly, like it has been over the last few days, it has been making me feel insane. And talking about this and promoting a narrative, a pro-Western, pro-imperialist narrative, and trying to balkanize China and trying to split off Xinjiang and split off Hong Kong and split off Tibet, but couching it in this like anti-imperialist, anti-colonialist language, it is making me feel like I am losing my mind. Seriously. And I have been feeling just like so alienated, and like I just have like, you start to question whether you're wrong, you know? And I'm like, am I the one that's wrong here? Am I the one that's fucked up here? It's just a really depressing feeling to think about this. It is disorienting. I'm going to look at this Boots Riley tweet, and we can look at the responses to it and get into more specifics about the arguments. But it's just like, it has honestly just made me feel depressed. Let's see here. here's the thing, and the outcry on this has just been like fucking crazy to me. Why this time and not with everyone else having bad ideas all the time on every other topic? I don't know. I don't know why. I'm not sure. I mean, I realize all the same people. If it was like during the Cold War, during the height of the Soviet Union, it's all the exact arguments about like Soviet imperialism and the idea of like moving into these places of which you had fought a war against, and then building socialism in those places and bringing them into your union of different socialist republics, and then people in the West who live in the heart of the empire, the most violent, brutal, exploitative empire in human history, and people that live here and then wag their finger and say like, well, you're doing imperialism. You're doing, just because you're socialist doesn't mean you can just go into these places and try and build socialism. You know, it's fucking, it's strange. And I guess that's just, this feeling of alienation is not something new, I guess, but I think I've just been feeling it more acutely over the last few days, and with the reaction to this Boots Riley thing, which I think, like, this is a TikTok which just shares basic facts about the situation. And I don't see anyone actually disagreeing with the actual facts. You just described what I meant in chat yesterday. The vast majority of others on the left are so unanimous about these questions. Are we the ones on the wrong path? Are we the cringe Stalinist authoritarian supporters idealizing what we might not know enough just because our own place is miserable? Well, I don't think so. But it certainly, in these moments, it makes you feel a little bit like that. It makes you ask these kinds of questions. All the high-minded liberals just mocking this person's appearance. Yeah, lots of that. No one dealing with the actual facts of it. It's literally just like sharing this and sharing Boots Riley's endorsement of it and being like, oh, I can't believe that he would endorse the Chinese Communist Party. I can't believe. Like, it's so shocking to people that this self-avowed communist would share viewpoints that support the Communist Party of China. It's just unthinkable to people. It's just unthinkable. Don't you know, if you're a communist in the West, you're supposed to think that China is bad and it's an evil authoritarian state capitalist dystopia? What is wrong with this guy? If it helps, yes, we're a tiny minority in the West, but also the West is a minority against the rest of the world. I mean, carrier wave, I mean, that's the main thing that I try to hold on to. When Ukraine is a big example as well, because I've realized how marginalized I am in my viewpoints on that over the Ukraine conflict. But then you look at like the global map of the countries that support arming Ukraine versus the countries that are neutral or support Russia, and it's the same map of all the former colonial countries versus everyone else. Just like every one of those maps when it comes to Xinjiang and the China's approach to dealing with extremism there, or recognizing Palestine, it's the same map all the time. So to me, I would find it a problem if you find yourself on the side of all the former colonial countries, but apparently not a lot of people have that same issue. Anyway, let's look at this controversial TikTok that everyone got mad at Boots Riley for sharing.
To violently defend the Tibetan slave-owning practice. Let's start with the receipts from 1951. To reunify China after their civil war, Mao Zedong wrote a detailed...
I'm just going to turn it up.
collaborated with the CIA to violently defend the Tibetan slave-owning practice. Let's start with the receipts from 1951. To reunify China after their civil war, Mao Zedong wrote a detailed agreement reaffirming China's sovereignty over Tibet. On May 23rd, the Dalai Lama's representatives officially signed the agreement in Beijing. Then, the Dalai Lama sent a telegram to Beijing on October 24th, affirming his enthusiastic acceptance. He said, quote, "The Tibet government and people unanimously support this agreement, and they will actively support the People's Liberation Army in Tibet." 4 years after that, the Chinese government continued to respect the Tibetan theocracy, with the mutual understanding that Tibet would begin a transition away from feudal and oppressive practices. Both the Dalai Lama and the Panchen Lama were repeatedly honored guests of the central government in Beijing. Karas, the long white silk scarves seen here, are the traditional Tibetan sign of welcome and respect. Both lamas were given a comprehensive tour of eastern China and granted rare access to top leadership. The 14th Dalai Lama was also appointed deputy chairman of the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress. However, Tibet's failure to shift towards the central government's progressive policies became a problem. After 8 years of patience, in 1959, with the encouragement and support of the CIA, the senior monks, and upper-class Tibetans, they challenged China's rule, resulting in an armed rebellion. To be clear, this is the United States causing death and destruction in order to prevent a country from eliminating feudalism and peacefully reunifying after war had already torn them apart. The feudal system in Tibet gave no rights or democracy to serfs, only to those who owned serfs. The central government retaliated harshly, raising tensions, and their brutal retaliation gave Western media sympathy when questioning China's sovereignty over Tibet. But all along, the CIA had been secretly collaborating with the Dalai Lama, and this is exactly what they wanted. This plaque is located at Camp Hale in Colorado, where ethnic Tibetans were trained for the rebellion against the Chinese. Eventually, the CIA aided the Dalai Lama in leading Tibet for India and even arranged to have his so-called Escape from Red China's Tyranny filmed for propaganda use by Western media. Thereafter, the CIA funded activities of the Dalai Lama for many years with millions of taxpayer dollars. Simply put, the goal was to create problems for China, a country that the United States had called an ally only a decade earlier. To show you what I mean, I'll post the pro-China propaganda film the US created during World War II next. It's pretty crazy.
So that's the TikTok that Boots Riley shared that had all these people, leftists, not conservatives, not liberals, but like people that are like, I'm on the left. I'm not a liberal. I'm not one of these liberals. I'm on the left. I'm a socialist. I'm in DSA. And people were reacting so strongly to Boots Riley for sharing this, which again is just a collection of basic historical facts about the situation. And I didn't see anyone disputing any of these facts. I didn't see one person saying like, this is what's incorrect about this. This didn't happen. This never happened. This is a distortion. I didn't see one person making this argument. All I see is folks saying shit like, this doesn't make it okay for them to do imperialism. So Boots Riley says, all right, here's a quick tutorial on how Tibet was a feudal slave-owning society, practices China were pushing them to abolish, and how the CIA worked with the Dalai Lama and other slave owners to keep those practices. That's the editorializing that Boots Riley added to this tweet. Again, he's just factually describing this video, which is just a collection of basic historical facts about the situation. And that's all. And I think the reason that it made me feel really alienated, because I was really interested in this viewpoint being exposed to more people, and have maybe people start to like ask a little bit more questions about this kind of thing, which they've always just internalized. This whole free Tibet, they're not allowed to speak the language, people are being oppressed, human rights abuses. People just have this knee-jerk idea about this. So I thought, hey, it's kind of neat that this is being shared so widely. Perhaps people are going to like change their view on this, or maybe ask themselves some critical questions about this situation and whether they've just uncritically assumed a number of things about this. And the reaction has been the exact opposite. My current politics can't account for reality, so it won't. Yes, Sorry to Bother You is really good, and his new film looks really good as well. I'm a Virgo, I think it's called. People love saying they like Boots until he actually says something other than basic capitalism bad pablum. Well, this is the thing. They're like, he goes and does interviews and he says, I'm a communist. And people are shocked that he's an internationalist who supports other communist movements in different countries. For people in the West, even people that call themselves socialists or leftists or whatever, this is like very hard to compute for them. Because also everything's running on the assumption that China's only pretending to be socialist and is not. Right? So most people have just internalized this basic idea. They're not actually socialist, even though it's led by the Chinese Communist Party. They use the iconography. They uphold and read and study Marx and Lenin, and in their education system, in their political system. But they're just saying that, though. They're not really socialist. They're only pretending to be socialist. Really, they're state capitalist, authoritarian, dystopian sweatshop to the world, or whatever it was that Naomi Klein said a few months ago. I think the DSA crowd just claims to be communist more as a punk rock provocation, nothing beyond that. I mean, there's definitely a big split as well, because I think there's a lot of people that describes. I know there's the DSA International Committee who have all correct takes about these things, and people in DSA get really angry at them for sharing these kinds of stances, whether it's about China or whether it's about Russia or Ukraine or whatever. So there is a bit of a split. I know there's some people that are more into this kind of internationalist side of things. But yeah, I think a lot of those people, they don't want to be like a liberal. It's lame to be a liberal Democrat. It's lame to be like a Democrat Hillary person, but it's cool and kind of edgy and different to be a socialist. But as you see when these things come up, the idea of what socialism even means gets completely distorted and watered down into nothingness. And in fact, I mean, there's a lot of that stuff in like the Brooklyn left as well. Like you look at the Red Scare, they don't even talk about socialism anymore because they Red Scare, to their credit, I don't listen to the show, but to their credit, they're at least honest about this. They're like, socialism isn't cool anymore. So now we're into this like reactionary shit. We've moved past that. We've moved past that because it's not cool and edgy anymore. So we don't want to be part of it. So at least they're open and honest about that. So let's look at some of these responses. And again, so just before we move on though, what is this video? It's a collection of basic facts about the situation, which I don't see anyone disputing at all. And Boots's tweet is literally just saying, here is a video about how Tibet was a feudal slave-owning society, practices China was pushing them to abolish, and how the CIA worked with the Dalai Lama and other slave owners to keep those practices. Which is that's just a basic historical truth. And this is what people got really up in arms about. Now let's look at the quote tweets. Yeah, oh God. And I hope I'm not doing, I took so much psychic damage looking at this. I hope I'm not doing the same to you, but I think it's actually really important. It makes me feel less insane to come on here and break down these arguments with you in the chat. It makes me feel a little bit less isolated and alienated in holding these viewpoints. Because I just had this moment like last night when I was just scrolling and I kept seeing responses to this where I was just like, I have like nothing in common with so many of these people in terms of these like views on geopolitics and socialism or imperialism or any of these things. This ain't it. You were an imperialist. That was the number one thing. That's the response from Kuleshov, anarcho-Possadist, postmodern, neo-Marxist, anti-campus. That's always a giveaway. You're an imperialist. So we have to break this down because people, again, it's using this language of imperialism and colonialism to talk about these things, which is the thing that really makes me feel fucking crazy. So like what is it imperialist? Is it Chinese imperialism to move into Tibet, overthrow the with the help of Tibetans, by the way, 95% of whom, as according to these tweets that we're looking at, were serfs at this time, and who were very implicated in this process, by the way, of overthrowing the previous system. But is it imperialism for China to go into Tibet, to go into Xinjiang, and all these places? Is it imperialism for them to add countries to the Belt and Road Initiative? This gets talked about a lot. I honestly hate it here right now. It feels like we're swimming in a revisionist version of reality. Yes, it does. In 2050, when the Italian communists overthrow and dissolve the Vatican, will it be imperialism? I can actually feel Rob going insane speaking about this. But we can see, I think there's other tweets we can look at too. But yeah, number one, what is it to be imperialist? It's not just invading a country, as we've talked about with Russia and Ukraine. That's not imperialism. Imperialism is not when you just invade a country. But it's a process of exploiting a nation or a people, right? Imperialism inherently has an element of exploitation involved, where the people of the region that are victims of imperialism are being deliberately impoverished in order for the imperialist country to benefit materially from it. Is that what's happening with China and Tibet? Well, as we've seen, living standards for everyone that lives in Tibet have improved drastically over that time. I talked about the huge infrastructure projects that they're building there. Is there a situation where wealth is being transferred from Tibet into the coffers of China? Is that what's happening there? And I don't think so. I don't think that is true. Is China exploiting Tibet? When they go in and overthrow a feudal slave society, again, not just arbitrarily, but with Tibetans being deeply implicated in that process, which we, I guess, forget about. It wasn't just China arbitrarily moving in and everyone in Tibet was saying, no, please. And they said, no, you'll take your freedom. Was that what's happening? No. The Union did an imperialism against the Confederacy. Community. This guy's tagging community notes. Mods. Where are the notes? Where are the notes that go against this? As usual from Westerns, colonialism is good when it's Chinese or Russian. This guy. Government at Georgetown. Look at those savage Orientals. We must go teach them our ways. How is that in any way a reflection of what he's saying in that tweet? How? I mean, that's an argument that I saw as well. There you go. This guy's got the right idea. I think this guy's part of this community. They need to give me $10 every time a young white guy who looks hard to employ repeats debunked CCP talking points word for word. But where is it debunked, though? I haven't seen anyone debunk any of this. I haven't seen one person actually offer up a different historical alternative or perspective of how this happened. There's a few good people in this comment section. Tanky talk. That's what other people doing. The Han man's burden. There is, again, it's this effort on the part of white Westerners, Norm Letterman, suggesting that the Chinese are engaged in the same kind of like supremacist, racial supremacist settler colonialism that our ancestors did. Ukraine flag and rose. Yeah, there we go. Imperialism is good, actually. This person from the History of China podcast, U.S. history teacher. You know what I mean, though? That's not even disputing any of the facts that are being shared here. It's literally just saying what you're describing is imperialism. We were just talking about how alienated and isolated we feel for having this viewpoint, and these dipshits pretend that we're the dominant opinion just because they encountered it once. Yeah, complete inversion of reality. This is embarrassing. And there's a lot of this too. Afghanistan under the Taliban isn't much different. Should the troops return to remove them from power? There's a lot of that kind of stuff as well. It's just the exact same as the US going into Afghanistan. It's the exact same as the US going into all these places. It's the exact same as like the British Empire going into these places and bringing them civilization. These are old, bad arguments that have been debunked before from a solid left radical perspective. I see. Okay. From Dr. Gerald Roche, Anthropology of State Violence, co-chair, Global Language Rights. This is funny as well. The Dalai Lama actually liked Mao, was sympathetic to communism, and went to Beijing to see him, which angered the CIA. This is really history, not TikTok history, which is funny because the actual video that this person is responding to clearly says that. Clearly says exactly that. And then obviously the Xinjiang accusations come out too. The UN expert says minorities suffer slavery in Chinese Xinjiang. Yay, imperialism from this guy. And there's a lot of this too, complaining it to the British Empire. You know, comparing it to the British Empire, compare it to...
Count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Lexi, hello. Thank you for the 8 months, tier 1. Thank you, Lexi. Thank you for this. Nothing more pathetic from Brianna here. From Brianna. Nothing more pathetic than promoting imperialism under the guise of it being liberatory. These comments are just so bad. Let me, there's one more too that I want to see. I think it's in the Curse Takes channel on the Discord. This led to a lot of Curse Takes being shared. Yeah, this. Then you are in favor of an external interference in East Turkestan to conquer it from China to stop the well-documented slave camps Beijing put up there. These are the responses. But I want to get into this idea too. It's the exact same justification, saying you're like improving their quality of life and you're eliminating all these old practices. Well, that's exactly what the British Empire said when they went into India, isn't it? That's exactly what every imperialist country has said, and every settler colonialist country, saying you need to tame the savages and you need to bring them civilization and infrastructure. And it's the exact same thing. Here's the thing, though. What about the idea that the British Empire and the former colonial countries and China are two different things with a different set of values, a different set of material and cultural conditions, and it's not this direct one-to-one comparison. Yeah, the British imperialists and colonialists did use this argument to go into India and to create this massive empire around the world. But as we know, they weren't actually doing that. They were not improving quality of life for people. There's many centuries of evidence of this. We know from the benefit of being able to study history that trillions of dollars worth of wealth was stolen from India during that period and used to make the British an extremely wealthy society, all while they were kind of couching this in this kind of progressive rhetoric. Is that what is happening in Tibet? We can we don't need to guess. We can look at decades of evidence. Has China been exploiting Tibet? Has China been exploiting their resources and taking from them and keeping them in poverty and serfdom? The reality is that no, they have not. No, they have not. As we talked about on Monday, the quality of life for everyone in that region has improved dramatically over the last few decades. If there was this, that's what I would want to know. If people want to sit around and say this is the exact same thing as what the British Empire did in India or in Canada for that matter, if this is the exact same thing, we can look at what Canada did to our indigenous people. We committed mass genocide against people. Yes, we put indigenous people in residential schools. What did we do in those schools? Did we teach them indigenous language and still try and uphold and promote their culture? No. We deliberately set out to alienate them from their culture and destroy their culture. And that's why there's these unmarked graves outside of all these schools, in addition to the mass grave that our entire country is founded on. Is that what's happening there? No, it's not. Because we can see images from the schools there and see that indeed the culture is still being upheld and still being taught. The language is being taught. There are temples where people can practice their religion. You can just look at the two different things and see that they are different. If anything, the only shit you can really criticize the Chinese government for was never applied to ethnic minorities and only applied to the majority Han. There's a lot of that as well. There are a lot of these ethnic groups that we uphold and we try to suggest that we're trying to, free, are literally have more rights in many cases than the actual Han population, which we describe as being Han supremacists or whatever. What if I told you that there was a difference between good things and bad things? Well, that's what I mean. It's not enough just to say this is imperialism, this is colonialism. I would like for people that hold this viewpoint to just show evidence of where the exploitation is. Where is it? That's what I would like to know. I know there's plenty of news stories out there about this repression and stuff that's being perpetrated, but is there news sources that come from outside of this NGO, NED backed dissident group think tank world? Voice Radio Free Asia and this kind of shit? If that's where your information is coming from about where this exploitation is, well, you got to question whether that information is really accurate when it's being promoted by these explicitly Western backed sources which are actually promoting and trying to uphold Western imperialism. So that's what I would like for people to do. If there is exploitation happening, if it is imperialism and this region is being exploited and kept impoverished so that the rest of the imperialist country can benefit. Show me where that process is taking place. Because when we actually look at it, as we know about China, about everywhere in China, they're incredibly focused on eliminating poverty. That's a big key difference to me, you know? When you're trying to eliminate poverty versus, you know, colonialism in India or Africa, where these places and these nations were kept intentionally impoverished and poverty actually increased as the resources were extracted. Is that what's happening in Tibet? No. And if it is, I would like for someone to show it to me. Like the idea that it's settler colonialism or imperialism to, in this process, move into Tibet and overthrow this barbaric feudal slave society, once again, with the help of Tibetans who are deeply implicated in that process. That's, according to people that live here in the heart of the empire, who live on a mass grave of indigenous peoples. To them, that is the exact same thing. That's settler colonialism. That's imperialism. Amazing, and Venus, seriously, amazing that this is where the discourse goes to when the Dalai Lama clearly told the child to suck his tongue. So you have this evidence of this fucking creep, this CIA-backed creep, which I don't think anyone even fucking denies, basically abusing a child on video. And 2 days later, the discourse is China is doing settler colonialism in Tibet. And supporting that, it means that you support imperialism, but just from when a non-Western country does it. It took 2 days from the discourse to go to creepy perv Dalai Lama to Chinese settler colonialism in Tibet. And you wonder why I feel crazy looking at this, you know? Like, Johnny, this is what I'm wondering. Like, I kind of thought maybe we were at a point where we could move past this idea that like, oh, we got to free Tibet. Why? Because of all the bad things that are happening. Well, what's going on? Well, we don't know really. Exactly. I thought maybe we were close to maybe being able to have a little bit more of a critical discussion about that. But that's what we have. We have creepy pedo Dalai Lama video over the weekend. And what today is? Fucking Thursday. Or Wednesday evening, the discourse on this is, why did China do settler colonialism in Tibet? So this is why, again, I'm trying to describe this like alienating feeling I was having looking at all these takes. And people, and I hate calling like specific people, but like stuff like this. Ed Bermillion, non-Western countries get to do a little imperialism as a treat. With, once again, no effort to actually challenge any of the facts that are being shared in these tweets. It's literally just saying, overthrowing this feudalistic slave society with the help of Tibetans, fucking again, I'll mention again, overthrowing this feudal slave society with this CIA-backed theocratic leadership is imperialism. And it's said with such confidence and with why would there be an effort to acknowledge why it's right when people just know that that's correct, right? Why would you even bother to back it up with like an actual analysis when you can just say, well, that's obviously imperialism, and if everyone's going to just agree with you, I guess. There's another one as well. Another person that I follow that I see has good takes often about some things. Says it's really important. Cooperlund says it's really important to have a coherent understanding of international relations that isn't simply the US is the only possible bad actor on the world stage, so you can keep yourself from backing into a corner where you're arguing that Tibet deserved Chinese settler colonialism. You know? And it's just like, we know the reality of settler colonialism. We can easily compare these two things. I don't know, folks. It's strange to me. It's strange to me. And there's the whole idea as well that when you get into like socialism in general, like, oh, you support imperialism when it's coming from socialism. Socialism, like as an ideology, is inherently like contradictory to settler colonialism. Socialism, and specifically Marxism-Leninism, is the political ideology with which cultures around the world have used to overthrow the shackles of colonialism. It's literally the whole idea of socialism is it's providing a counter to colonialism, to imperialism. So the idea that if you're a socialist country and you're trying to bring people into your fold, especially places that still have this strong historical connection to your nation, it's not like Tibet and China are across the world from one another. They're fucking next door neighbors, and there's a long shared cultural history, another thing. But if you're a socialist country and you're trying to bring countries into your fold and improve their qualities of life, definitionally, it's not colonialism. Because you're trying to give these places tools to overthrow the shackles of imperialism and create a better standard of living that would not be accessible if it was a colonized country. And again, I'll just point out also that there's no third option here. There's not this third option where, you know, Tibet can be part of the PRC, or it can be a sovereign, autonomous, liberal democracy where everyone gets along and they're totally being left alone. That's not what is on the table here. If Tibet were to separate somehow from the PRC, and again, I don't even think there's any appetite for that in the country. Maybe among certain reactionary groups in the country that want to return to that previous system. I don't think it's by any means a majority. And if I'm wrong about that, please someone point it out to me. If there's evidence that the majority of people in Tibet don't actually want to be part of the PRC. If there's evidence of that, I would be interested in seeing it. But if that were to happen, and they did separate from the PRC, would they just be this autonomous liberal democracy? Of course not. They would be a Western colony. They'd be an outpost for Western imperialism, just as Taiwan is, just as South Korea is, just as Japan is, just as Ukraine wants to be. This idea, it's this idea that it's the choice between being subjected to Chinese imperialism or being this perfect autonomous democracy where everyone gets along is total nonsense. That's not an option. That's not an option on the table. It's the same thing for all these places in the global south that are trying to develop and build infrastructure. There's not this third option where it's like, no, they shouldn't be getting World Bank and IMF money, but they also shouldn't be subjected to Chinese colonialism in the Belt and Road Initiative. There's no, like, if you're a developing nation, you need capital, you need infrastructure. There's two options. There's not a third other option where you get to be left alone and you get to retain your autonomy and your sovereignty. There's two options: the Western version of development or the Belt and Road Initiative. That's what's on the table. That's what's on the table for these nations. Drew Pavlodov shit, I don't know who that is exactly, said that exact line, then was pressed on his sources, and his sources were Tibetans that lived outside of China. Well, and that gets to the next part that I want to talk about, this whole listen to Tibetans thing, because I know there's plenty of Tibetans living in the West that will go on here and tell me that I'm supporting colonialism and I'm supporting imperialism and all that stuff. But like, why do we only listen to certain official representatives of these like dissident ethnic groups while we ignore the people that actually live in those nations, like we saw in that documentary on Monday, people that grew up in the serf society and are living in Tibet now and feel like my life has gotten way better over those decades. I do not want the status quo to change. We don't want to hear from them. Hello, I'm a leftist from Brooklyn. I don't know how no one fought back against Hitler. I would have fought back against the Nazis anyways. Did you hear about China lately? We should nuke them. I mean, to say nothing that the people that are like, oh yeah, of course I'm socialist, eat the rich. I'm all about posting guillotine memes and stuff like that. And then when there's an example of like a socialist country actually being violent to reactionaries, they're like, whoa, that's terrible. How can you support that? Which just shows how much of this is aesthetic for some people, right? When the actual rubber hits the road, they actually don't support any of this bullshit about eating the rich that they like to talk about. Ugh. But I want to get into this as well. This whole listen to Tibetans thing. Tibetans don't want to be part of the PRC. Well, okay, I'm sure that many don't. Many of the, especially in the West, the Tibetans that get invited into our political system, that are in the media, yeah, they don't want to be part of that, even though they don't live there. But many Tibetans that actually do live in Tibet don't want to change that status quo, do recognize that their lives have drastically improved, their material conditions have improved, they have all this modern infrastructure being built, and are actually quite comfortable with that. And again, that's not what we're describing right now is not an imperialist system. An imperialist system where they're being exploited at the benefit of someone else. That's not what's going on. And if it is what's going on, again, someone can point this out to me. If someone can point to me out where this exploitation is taking place and where wealth is being taken from Tibet and transferred to China, I would like for someone to point it out to me. Yeah, the ones that lost their human property don't want to be part of the PRC. Yeah, and there's whole like, diaspora ethnic groups are as well that grow up in the West that don't really have any connection to these places, but are told certain things by their communities because in the West we cultivate these dissident groups from countries that we don't like. And yeah, so people grow up in that environment. They get told certain things about the horrors back home and the horrors that were inflicted on their ancestors and family members, and then they hold these viewpoints. I can't remember, but there was a chatter who asked to talk to their friend from Tibet or Xinjiang. Yeah, I think it was his Uyghur friend. Go meet my Uyghur friend for a coffee or something. No, thank you. And then so this is the whole thing as well. The whole listen to Tibetans thing, which ignores the reality that as much as people want to say, oh yeah, this was like Chinese imperialism to go and overthrow this feudalistic slave society, when Tibetans were leading the way on that. Comrade Phuntsho Wanye, co-founder of the Tibetan Communist Party in Lhasa in 1943. Dalai Lama's government expelled him in June 1949. He told Tibetan Lama officials, Lhasa belongs to all Tibetans, not just to clergy nobles. You can force me to leave today, but I'll be back tomorrow. Phuntsho Wanye went to communist base in western Yunnan and merged Tibetan Communist Party into the Communist Party of China in September 49. He came back to Tibet with the PLA 18th Army in 1950, where he persuaded Lhasa government to sign 17-point agreement for the peaceful liberation of Tibet. Phuntsho Wanye translated for Mao's meeting with the Dalai Lama and Panchen Lama in 1954 in Beijing. Wanye was purged in anti-rightist campaign after 1957, imprisoned in 1959, released, returned to Chinese leadership after Cultural Revolution in 1978. He has an autobiography in English. And then if you want to get into like excesses or things that went too far or mistakes that happened or liberties that were trampled, there are examples of that in the Cultural Revolution. And I don't think anyone would deny that. Even though overall it still did have this huge transformative effect on every society that's part of the PRC. But this whole idea of like Chinese imperialism going into Tibet against the will of everyone else, ignoring the role. Yeah, Xi's family was purged. That's right. I think there was a lot of purging going on. I think maybe some of the purging maybe went a little bit too far there. But this whole idea that Tibetans weren't involved in this process in the first place is also not accurate. There's also evidence there's like Tibetans in India now that are going back to Tibet. Like there's an outpouring of Tibetan immigrants in India that are all leaving and going back to Tibet now because the material conditions have improved so much. And here's this too. 2 scientific surveys of Tibetans in Tibet, one by the University of Ohio, the other by the Tibetan government in exile, of 17,000 Tibetans, represent what Tibetans in Tibet think. 90% say life's better than when the lamas were in charge. Only 29% want independence. In this survey conducted in 2000 and this is 2000, and there's been significant increases in quality of life and infrastructure in that time. In this survey conducted in 2000 by the renowned Tibetologists Melvin Goldstein, Cynthia Beale, Ben Jiao, and Funsong Tsering, they asked a sample of Tibetans from across the TAR whether their lives are better than that of their parents. Do you have a better life now than your parents did? One of the cohorts of the sample, it's the age group between 60 to 79. In 2000, that means they were born roughly between 1920 and 1940. That means that almost all of their parents lived entirely before Chinese policies were instituted after 1959. An astounding 90% answered yes, that is, their lives are indeed better than that of their parents. So it would appear that the Dalai Lama's claim, which the West no doubt accepts unquestioningly, that China had turned Tibetan heaven on earth to hell on earth, is, like many other claims about China and Tibet in the West, absolute bullshit. One study conducted secretly by the Tibetan government in exile did shortly after the 2008 March riots. Here it looks like Tibetans inside Tibet who want independence are in the minority, 29%, or about 5,000 out of a total sample size of 17,000. And again, that's in 2008. And there's still been a lot of vast increases in infrastructure and quality of life since that time. But I think the whole poverty thing is a big part of it to me. The poverty thing is a big part of it to me. When people say it's imperialism, like, that's the question. If it's imperialism, why the focus on eliminating extreme poverty? The imperialist countries, the colonialist countries, the British Empire, increased poverty in these societies, even when they were using this progressive rhetoric about abolishing these cultural practices and building infrastructure. Yes, that was what the British Empire was doing. But you can just see from opening a history book that that was all bullshit designed to give a nice little veneer to this exploitative process. And you can see that poverty actually increased because these places were being exploited, and that the excuses that the British colonialists were using were complete bullshit designed to make themselves and others feel better about this mass theft that they were engaged in. Whereas China and Tibet or elsewhere, everywhere in the PRC, are working diligently on eliminating extreme poverty. So you see, kind of two completely different things. And it's not just, they went into this country and overthrew the previous system and brought them into their fold. So that's settler colonialism, that's imperialism. Like these words actually have like meanings. These concepts actually have like definitions. And people are so cavalier with throwing this stuff around without, it seems to me, without having any actual like understanding of what these concepts actually mean. Like as we see with China all the time, they're doing imperialism when they have trade deals with other countries. Not only did they do imperialism in Tibet by overthrowing this like slave society and building massive infrastructure projects there, but they're doing imperialism and neo-colonialism in Africa, you see, by bringing these nations into the Belt and Road Initiative, building ports and roads and bridges and power plants and water treatment facilities and schools in exchange for their natural resources, just making basic trade deals, mutually beneficial trade deals. Well, that's imperialism, according to our Western leftist friends. No, see, they didn't answer honestly because the hive mind, CCPP, is hacking and monitoring the entire population, especially those in exile. Let me see if I can find... I'm just going to find this other tweet that says something to that effect, but like completely unironically. Let me see here. It's my secret, top secret China chat that I have, that I'm in. Let me just find this tweet. Just talk amongst yourselves for a moment while I figure this out. Okay, here it is. And this is like a Lobi account. You know, maybe this is not representative of like a larger viewpoint, but I kind of feel like it is. Which is, I guess, a quote from this book. People are sharing this book, Taming Tibet, Landscape Transformation and the Gift of Chinese Development. And this person says, development as a hegemonic project that simultaneously recruits... This is a phrase that I think made me feel really insane. Recruits Tibetans to participate in their own marginalization while entrapping them in gratitude to the Chinese state. So, by building these massive infrastructure projects, by eliminating poverty, by promoting education, including education in Tibetan language and keeping these cultural practices, China is not doing any of these things to like try and bring good things into the world or into their society, but is recruiting Tibetans to participate in their own marginalization while entrapping them in gratitude to the Chinese state. So they're like deviously, nefariously building infrastructure and lifting people out of poverty to trick people into liking them. And this is the concept that I just don't get, to participate in their own marginalization. Like, that's what I'm confused about. Who is being marginalized? Who is being marginalized when people's quality of lives are improving, which again does not happen in settler colonialism. The quality of life improves for the settlers. It improves for the imperialists. It doesn't actually improve for the people in those societies. But when you're eliminating extreme poverty, when you're building infrastructure, when you're increasing and not decreasing the average person's quality of life, how are they then being marginalized? They're recruiting Tibetans to participate in their own marginalization. How are they being marginalized, though? When their lives are improving, when poverty is decreasing, when infrastructure is being created, making life better for everyone that lives there. You know? Wild how the anti-communist ideological framework transforms any data about existing communist societies into hostile evidence. Yeah, no, you literally say people's lives are being improved, and that's evidence of some like nefarious plot that's taking place. it's honestly strange to me, and all of this over the last couple of days, especially it's coming from a video of the Dalai Lama trying to kiss a small child on video, to like Chinese imperialism in Tibet. It took 3 days for the discourse to go from there. And all these people that I follow online that are like, oh yeah, I'm leftist. Oh yeah, I'm in DSA. Oh yeah, I'm anti-imperialist, are all just like, yep, of course. Yep. That's Chinese imperialism. And it's just like, if all the effects are good, I have to ask if the intentions actually matter. As ridiculous as that idea that it's also a huge 4D chess trick is in the first place. Like, that's what it's like. You're tricking people into liking you by trying to improve their quality of life. That's the argument that's being made here. And again, people will say, well, that's what the colonialists said. That's what the imperialists said. Yes, but they weren't increasing people's quality of life, though. We can clearly see that they were not. They were using this kind of language to make themselves and people in their society feel better from the fact that they were ruthlessly exploiting these places, but they were not in fact doing that. And you can look at the poverty, look at the starvation that continued, like the famine in India in the Churchill era. That was after 200 years of colonization by the British. Look what the decades and centuries of colonization in Africa actually led for people that live in Africa, where poverty all increased, right? Whereas you can look at these places where China is doing, bringing people into the PRC, into their system, and people's lives are improving, as they did in the Soviet Union as well. All these like feudalistic, Russia's another example as well, like these feudalistic serf societies that over a period of a few decades after being incorporated into the Soviet Union, people had healthcare, people had education, there was infrastructure being built. People were able to being great cultural centers of art and music and different things like that. People's lives are being drastically increased. People's quality of lives are being drastically increased. And yet people in the West then and today would say the same thing, would say, look, they're being victims of socialist colonialism. Yeah, the idea that a society might just pursue progress for its own sake. Well, and that's, as always, too, it's the every accusation is a confession. It's because we can't fathom living in a settler colonialist society ourselves, who have been benefactors of exploitation and imperialism. We can't fathom another culture using this kind of rhetoric and not also be lying and not also be obfuscating their true evil, nefarious purposes, right? Because that's what our history is. And we can't fathom another culture that maybe doesn't share the same value system. All of that, plus in less than 5 decades, they went from being some of the least developed feudal societies to launch people into space. Yeah, and people still say, why do you defend Soviet imperialism? The communist greatest trick to tirelessly serve and respect the oppressed masses. That's right. Everyone is evil, but we're the least evil because we say so. That's right. I'm just going to get another beverage. I just talked now for the last hour and 20 minutes or so about this, and I'm still not feeling that well. I got a little worked up because I think I needed to talk about this shit because I really felt crazy. I really felt very alienated and just totally fucking crazy reading some of these takes. As Peretti said, the Russians were still using oxen and wagons during World War II, took the brunt of the losses, and then they made such strides. I mean, in every example you can find of countries that were part of the Soviet system, huge increase in their quality of life, which obviously fell off a cliff after the dissolution of the Soviet system. In Albania, in Yugoslavia, in in Russia and Ukraine. Like you can measure these things. You can see the increase and you can see the decrease when the system goes away. But again, from people who live in the heart of the empire and benefit from the empire, they say, well, it's just all bad. It's just all bad to me. It's all bad. It was bad when our ancestors doing it, and it's bad what they're doing. It's just the same thing. And I don't know. I have felt very isolated and very alone seeing people kind of share this viewpoint. I'll be right back. I'm just going to get a drink, and now I got to watch a video or something because I can't keep hooting and hollering. Okay, so I'm not sure how much more I could talk about this. Time is it? 1:44. Okay. Excuse me. You see what I do, folks? I come in here to hoot and holler for your entertainment. When it feels like I'm gargling with shards of glass. Got black lung from the content mine. That's right. Oh. Despite suffering from consumption, Rob is still here for us. And I would like to remind everyone that if you enjoy this kind of content, if maybe looking at me rant and rave about this stuff makes you feel slightly less alienated, and you enjoy this content and you enjoy the community, please, if you can, subscribe to TRRS, which costs $5, or it's completely free of charge with your Amazon Prime account. Get all the very best emotes, be part of the very best community on Twitch, and support this content that I do here day in, day out. As we know, as I've articulated, this viewpoint is not exactly widely held, I think. I think some of the views that I express sometimes on this show in terms of Western left are quite unpopular. Excuse me. And if you like that there's a place on Twitch where these views can be discussed openly and honestly, and we can have frank, nuanced discussions about these things, the only way that exists is through the generosity of the TRRS community members. So please, if you can, subscribe to TRRS, or you can gift subscriptions or friend coin, become part of the community, join Twitch's only two-dimensional, triangle-shaped friendship access and trickle-down clout tiered reward system. If you enjoy this kind of commentary, and if it makes you feel a little bit less crazy to hear me rant and rave about this stuff when we're just inundated with these kinds of Western leftist takes where they use the language of imperialism and colonialism to attack America's greatest enemies. Oh, that's refreshing. Okay. Okay. No takers. All right. I don't even care. I don't even mind. Don't worry about it. It barely even occurs to me.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
In between jobs, right now, I had an interview today. That's all right, Weenus. Weenus, you've been very,
You've just
you've been very
become an elite
supportive.
member of the Friendship Triangle.
You've been very supportive, Weenus. And again, I don't want to guilt people that don't have the funds to support the channel.
You can count
Believe
on
me.
me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Believe me. Thank you, Diego, for the 2 gifted subs. Diego, thank you so much. Thank you, Gen X Bushy, for the 5 gifted subs, often bailing me out in these moments. Thank you, Gen X Bushy. And thank you to Johnny as well, aka Subversive History, another very subversive streamer that everyone should follow and support as well. Thank you, Johnny, for the 2 gifted subs. I really appreciate that. Thank you. I love living in a 2-dimensional shape with 3 vertices. There we go. There we go. More guilt. I honestly fucking hate having to try to guilt trip people to support this channel because people are very, very generous. Very, very generous. And I believe me, I that is not lost on me. Excuse me. So I'm just trying to find like a video of some kind that we can look at now. Ugh. What do we got here? Does anyone have any videos that maybe are coinciding with any of these things that we're talking about today? I think I did want to get into the Ukraine file. There's some really interesting stuff going on with those Ukraine files. I know there's a lot of people that I like and trust a lot who have talked about that think it's some kind of op, that think it's like intentional disinformation being spread. And I think I'm pretty partial to some of the explanations for it. The way that the media is latching onto it, whereas if it was an actual leak, they would be ignoring that it was taking place. There's this Daniel Dumbrell video. This seems really good, and I like Daniel a lot, and I like the work that he does for this kind of stuff. I think it's really good to like demystify this. I may want to move away from Tibet for a little bit just because I'm hooting and hollering about it so much. There's this John Mearsheimer video, why the U.S. failed internationally, from one day ago. That could be good. Let me see if I have anything else here. I really can't talk too much more. Ugh. God, this stuff made me feel crazy, folks. Seriously. And I got to say, I must thank you. I must thank people in the community. I know often it's me that's talking you through it all, but I think sometimes I need your help to talk me through it. Because the last couple days made me feel just really fucking horrible. It's cool that Boots Riley stuck his neck out. Yeah, I mean, I appreciate Boots for using his platform to be an internationalist, you know? And as I've talked about before, people say, what does it mean to be, if you're in the West, what does it mean to be a socialist, you know? And I think a big part of that, it's not everything, but a big part of it is being an internationalist and being in solidarity with people around the world that are trying to build an alternative system, that are trying to build something. Whether you think it's perfect or not, or whether you think it fits your definition of what socialism is or is not, which I think is bullshit in and of itself, because considering that we live in the heart of the empire, benefit from being part of the empire, and have never fucking accomplished anything in our lives, if you're talking about like a left-wing political movement. And then just be in solidarity rather than wagging your finger at China or Venezuela or Korea or whatever and saying, well, that's not really socialism. They're not doing socialism the way that I want to. Why didn't they press the socialism button? Be in solidarity with people that are trying to build something, you know? I think that's a central part of being a socialist in the West. That's what Boots Riley does. And that's the funny thing, is that people are surprised. People are surprised. What, does Boots Riley support the Chinese Communist Party? It's just unfathomable to people. That's the amazing thing to me. It's just so crazy to people. How does this communist support the Chinese Communist Party? It's just a big fucking mystery, isn't it? You might find, if you look at the words you're using, you might notice some crossover there. Maybe the answer is in the words that you just used to describe the situation. And people just say, they just can't believe it. They can't believe it. They're fine supporting Azov, though. Well, the thing is, Azov is countering Russian imperialism, though. Which is exactly why I think you need to understand like what these terms actually mean and which country is imperialist and who isn't. And stop obfuscating the obvious fact that the United States is far and away, by any stretch, the world's foremost imperialist power, and no one even comes close. And then once you understand that basic concept, it prevents you from having these kind of incoherent positions about it, where you have to support NATO arming fascists in Eastern Ukraine to fight against Russian imperialism. If you can wrap your mind around some of these concepts, then you can prevent yourself from sounding like an idiot when you talk about these things, or holding like an incoherent worldview. So maybe this is good.
History.
When was this? I lived in Yorkshire but spent all my summers in Portugal and witnessed huge seismic change in their policies improve so much. Notably, legalizing all drugs and shifting funding, and witnessed its materialistic positive impact on crime, homelessness, suicide, community, and life in general for the masses. Yeah, and like it's not like Portugal is even socialist, but still you can see them engaging in this process of trying to like improve people's material conditions in that way. And they've had a lot of success, I know, especially with the drug policies. So let's hear from Yersheimer, and then I might finish after that, because I just don't feel up to continuing, really.
History of the liberal international order. I want to talk about the Cold War orders and the post-Cold War order. Very important to understand what's going on here.
This is a video called "Why the U.S. Failed Internationally." It was posted a couple days ago, but I don't know when this clip is from. It's almost 90 degrees out here, and the apartment complex doesn't take the covers off the air conditioners till May. Yeah, it's quite warm here today as well, and I'm realizing as well that it's going to get fucking hot in here in the summer months. I'm going to have to figure out some solution to that. Because here's Mearsheimer. And yes, I do have the link.
As I said to you before, in my story, the liberal international order is the post-Cold War order. It's not the Cold War order. And the reason should be obvious to you now. The Cold War was a bipolar world. And in that bipolar world, the United States was engaged in an intense security competition with the Soviet Union. Soviet Union was engaged in an intense competition with the United States. And the United States was not free to create a liberal international order. Instead, what you get in the Cold War,
and when they did create the liberal international order, history was over and everything was okay.
Orders. The Soviet-led communist order and the US-led Western order. Those bounded orders were created to wage the Cold War. Think about NATO. Look at the origins of the European Union. The origins of the European Union are based on realpolitik. Most people today think it was really all about, economic prosperity. Economic prosperity mattered, but the EU was mainly set up at the beginning for purposes of waging the Cold War. All those institutions were part of a bounded order in the West, and the Soviets had their own bounded order: Warsaw Pact, Comintern. Right? So you had these two bounded orders, and you also had a very weak realist international order. Think proliferation, the NPT, right? The IAEA, Nuclear Suppliers Group, all those institutions, Soviets and Americans, the two great powers on the planet, were involved in those institutions. So you had a thin realist international order and two bounded realist orders. Okay, now that's the Cold War. No liberal international order. But what happens in 1989? In 1989, the Soviet Union loses the Cold War and its bounded order collapses. And the US-led Western order emerges triumphant.
And everything was great.
What we decide to do is take that Western order, that Western bounded order, and turn it into a liberal international order. Because we can do it. We're the unipole. We have no other great power to worry about, so there's no great power security competition. We're a liberal state, and we want to remake the world in our own image. And we have this wildly successful bounded order that we think we can expand. Think about NATO and EU expansion and the color revolutions in Eastern Europe. NATO and the EU were created during the Cold War. They were part of a bounded realist order. But realism's gone, but the institutions are still there. So what you do is you take those institutions and you just move them eastward. You incorporate more and more countries into this order. It's morphing from a bounded order into an international order. That's what NATO expansion, EU expansion, the color revolution is all about. What about the Bush Doctrine? The Bush Doctrine was designed to deal with the terrorism problem and the nuclear proliferation problem in the greater Middle East by turning every country in that region into a liberal democracy. Iraq was just the first stop on the train line. We expected to go to war in Syria, Iran, and turn the entire region into a sea of democracies. This is what promoting the liberal international order is all about. Engagement with China. What were we doing with China? The idea was, let's get them hooked on capitalism. Let's get them integrated into these institutions. They'll get rich. And once they become rich, they'll demand democracy. China will turn into a liberal democracy. And to use Robert Zoellick's term, it will become a responsible stakeholder. How could it be otherwise if they're a liberal democracy, right? That's just the way the world works in the minds of most people in the West. I'm sure most of you Australians think this way. You love the engagement. Let's engage China. So we...
Is this the one where he goes on his famous... That's a funny pause face. Is this the one where he goes on his famous rant about this? When he talks about, you don't want to be on our bad side. Which before we really got into Mearsheimer, we looked at a lot. Can't remember, because I know that was for us in Australia as well.
Caning China, engage China. Now, as I said to you, the golden years were 1990 to 2004. If I had been here before 2004, you would have thought I was nuts, right? But then in 2005, the order started going south. Iraq turned into a disaster. Afghanistan, which first looked like a great success, turned into a disaster. The international economy almost went off the cliff in 2008. The euro crisis happened shortly after that. I could go on and on, right? Something went badly wrong.
The mafia rant, yeah, exactly. Which is one reason I respect Mearsheimer, because he says these things which are very true and outlines the way these dynamics work. And when he says it, it's like, Jesus, it sounds like a mob boss. And you realize, oh yeah, that's because the U.S. is a mob boss. And Canada and Australia and all these countries are its little lackeys. Joey Fingers or whatever. I don't know what we would be. Sammy Syrup, something like that. I don't know. Paulie Putin. Putin Paulie. Something like that. That's what Canada would be in this mafia boss analogy. But as cartoonish as it is, the dynamic that he describes is totally correct. Sammy Cold Toes.
Now, as Tom said, lots of people think the problem is Donald Trump, right? Oh my God, how did that guy ever get elected? And, once we get rid of him in 2020 and we put somebody like Joe Biden in there, we'll be fine. We just sort of go back to square one, right? I want to be clear here. I am not a Trump supporter. Right? I'm very clear on that. I'm not a Trump supporter. But I do not believe that Donald Trump is responsible for the mess we're in. In fact, it's very important to understand that Donald Trump got elected in part by running against the liberal international order, which of course is why most of you don't like him, right?
We control the price of maple You want to serve the pay for the privilege.
Spreading democracy around the world, and as you know, he's never been an authoritarian leader or a dictator he didn't want to jump into bed with, right? I
tried to do like a mafia sniff, and it was all like congested. That was not very good.
One. Two, with regard to an open international economy, the guy's a protectionist. And with regard to institutions, he's never seen an institution he doesn't loathe. NATO's obsolete. EU leaders say that he's the greatest threat to the EU they've seen on the planet. The guy loathes the WTO. He's never seen an institution he likes. NAFTA, pulled out of the TPP, which I think was a huge mistake, but he didn't like institutions. He ran against the liberal international order. He said it failed, and he got elected. He's not the problem. He's a manifestation of the problem. What really went wrong? The order contains the seeds of its own destruction.
That's interesting. I was talking about how, I've talked about it many times, but the whole thing about Russia, after winning the Soviet Union, like they literally they had everything that they wanted. All they had to do was bring Russia into their fold. Russia gave up their political system, to finally, stop having to fight this Cold War. And they won. They got them to overthrow their own system. The Soviet Union was gone. All those gains, all those material gains, gone. All they had to do was be nice to Russia. All they had to do was be nice to Russia at that point, and they could have brought them into their fold. But their hatred of Russians and their insistence on continually humiliating them and antagonizing them has now sown this it was the seed that has now blossomed into this totally thriving anti-Western international order now that exists, which didn't have to happen. It's a result of our own belligerence.
And let me go through the argument as quickly as I can. First of all, we assume to begin with, this is the Frank Fukuyama thesis. For those of you who haven't read or long ago read Frank's very famous piece, go back and read it. His basic argument is that there is no alternative to liberal democracy. We are inexorably moving towards a planet that's filled with liberal democracies. Wrong. Liberal democracy doesn't look so attractive to a lot of people today.
No.
There are alternative models. I love liberal democracy.
Imagine being in China and seeing the development that's happened there over the last 20, 30 years and feeling like you're actually represented and that the government is actually like doing things to like help you increase your material needs, your material conditions, and being like, oh yeah, it sounds, sign me up for what Canada and America is doing right now. This seems really great. This seems really fantastic. No, that sounds wonderful.
I'm glad I was born and raised in the United States, but not every.
Look at what they did in the Middle East, all of Africa and Central and South America and the Caribbean for any non-aligned country simply for wanting to set their own prices and have actual fair trade. Yeah, I mean, it gets into that question of like, is it imperialism or is it colonialism? I think Haiti's a good example, right? What did Haiti do when Haiti tried to like raise the minimum wage? It's like, that's imperialism. Then America and Canada go in and overthrow that system, fund and arm these oppositions. They coup the government to ensure that that's never going to happen. Where is China doing the same thing? In Tibet or anywhere else? Like when they're literally improving people's material conditions and not keeping them in poverty and enslavement. A lot of this stuff about Tibet, it really reminds me of the Peretti thing. The revolution, it's got to be perfect. It's got to be flawless. You know? Are they going to be able to keep their feudal slave societies?
Everybody on the planet agrees with me. There are alternatives. Go to Russia, ask the Russians about liberal democracy. They think about the 1990s when that country was a total disaster. They don't want to hear about liberal democracy. They'll take soft authoritarianism with Vladimir Putin every time. Second, the crusading Saul Paul ends up in endless wars. Do you realize that the United States of America has been at war for 2 out of every 3 years since the Cold War ended? And we have fought 7 different wars. We are a highly militarized state. To put it in slightly different terms, we are addicted to war. That's what happens when you become a crusader state. And when you're trying to create a liberal international order and remake the world in your own image, you are a crusader state. Number 3, the crusading Saul Paul ends up poisoning relations with the world's major powers. This is NATO expansion, EU expansion, and the color revolutions. You think the Russians are happy about us driving NATO right up to their border? I can tell you they're not. And they've been telling us that since the mid-1990s.
It was very clear about that for 20 straight years, 25 years.
Ukraine and Georgia a part
Stop doing it.
NATO. They told us in no uncertain terms, that ain't happening. And it isn't happening, right? The Chinese, you think the Chinese are happy about us interfering in their politics and talking about turning them into a liberal democracy? You notice that they think we're behind the protests in Hong Kong? This is surprising? It isn't surprising at all, because they understand what the United States was trying to do, turn China into a liberal democracy, and they don't like it. So we've poisoned relations with the Russians and the Chinese.
And the whole thing about Hong Kong too, it's like, even if you want to take the idea that the West or the US was not behind those protests, they did and used their massive media apparatus to boost those protests and talk about them endlessly on the mainstream media every night. And they did bring protest leaders to America to meet with like fucking Ted Cruz and all these reactionary people. So whether you want to say that they're like behind them or not, you want to take away people's agency to protest or whatever or not, they did try to co-opt them at the very least. You know? It's like, what are people supposed to think when the protest leaders go visit America and go visit all these like reactionary American politicians to get little head pats and media hits? What are they supposed to think? Yeah, they think that America's behind it. Is the MSM talking about French protests right now? Interestingly, Dakadoon, they are starting to a lot more. Now that Macron's language that he's been using after his little visit to China and the language he's been using, all of a sudden, I've seen a couple of stories that are quite concerned with the civil rights of these French protesters. It's funny how that works, isn't it?
In fact, we've so thoroughly poisoned relations with the Russians that they've jumped into bed with the Chinese. The order clashes with nationalism by undermining sovereignty and national identity. I could go on and on about this. With regard to undermining sovereignty, anytime you create really powerful institutions and you give them a lot of authority to make decisions, think the EU, think how Many people in Britain think about Brussels. Brussels is a curse word in Britain to many Brits. That's why you got Brexit. Many Brits feel decisions about Britain's future should be made in London, not in Brussels. And then with regard to national identity, just think about open borders, right? You know, the EU has this system that basically involves open borders, taking in refugees. Oof. In the age of nationalism, that's a prescription for really big trouble. Hyperglobalization, right? We went to hyperglobalization. We moved from a globalized system to a hyperglobalized system. We went from GATT to the WTO. Trade became much more fulsome. It was much easier to move capital around the world. And this created all sorts of problems. Donnie Roderick, in his terrific book on the paradoxes of globalization, lays this whole story out. As a result, lots of people lost jobs in the Western world. The liberal international order was undermined inside countries like the United States and Britain because of the economic consequences of hyperglobalization. And those economic problems led to significant political problems. And then finally, integrating China into the liberal world order and making China richer and richer undermines unipolarity. You understand what's happening here? We're moving from unipolarity to multipolarity. And one of my principal themes here that you don't want to lose sight of is you can only have a liberal international order in a unipolar world, because the unipole then does not have to worry about balance of power politics. Once you go into a multipolar world, once you're in a multipolar world or you're in a bipolar world, balance of power politics are back on the table for the great powers. And remember what John said, it's the great powers that create orders. So unipolarity is finished because China and Russia are now great powers, and we're not in a unipolar world.
Okay, that was interesting. That was interesting stuff. I gotta go. It's a dying empire and a dying host right now. I gotta go relax for an hour before I gotta go pick up my kid from school. Thank you. Thank you, folks. Last chance, if anyone does want to subscribe to the program and support the content here that I do on Twitch, please feel free, but it's a shorter stream today. I don't have the mental or physical energy to sit here and try and convince people to subscribe to the show. People have already been very generous as well. If you do want to support the content that I do, please do. It's very, very helpful, and I appreciate it a lot. That's the only way this content stays on the air, is through people very, very generously supporting the work that I do here. So if you can, please subscribe. I gotta go soon.
You've just become an elite member of the Friendship Triangle.
Pathogen, thank you so much. Thank you for the 5 gifted subs, Pathogen. Hell yeah, very kind of you. Thank you. I really appreciate that. It's not allergies. I don't think, Johnny. I've never had any allergies. I know you can develop allergies as you get older.
Count on me. You're gonna have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
I know you can develop allergies when you get older, but I think it's just a cold. My kid was sick.
You can count on me. You're gonna have good old Rob.
He's climbing all over me and slobbering all over me and stuff, and sleeping in the same bed. And it's a miracle that I haven't been more sick over the last year. Mustache Imperial, thank you for the gifted sub. Thank you, Mustache. And thank you also to Sunny Sola for the 3 gifted subs. Thank you, Sunny Sola. I really appreciate it. Thank you, folks, for the support. Seriously. Again, like I've been feeling, I tried to talk about this feeling of alienation that I've been having over the last couple of days with this whole Dalai Lama Tibet kind of thing, Tibet discourse. And it's helped me to be able to talk to you folks about this stuff. I hope it's helped you maybe feel a little bit less alienated.
I have no choice but to stand.
Oh, look at that. A Patreon pledge. Thank you, Kevin. The $2 Patreon pledge. Thank you, Kevin. sometimes when people downgrade their Patreon subscription, it shows up an alert there. And I think there's a couple times that I've thanked people for actually downgrading their subscription, but still, I appreciate it. I appreciate everyone that supports the channel. I really, really do. I really don't do enough with Patreon. I really don't ever post there. It's literally just like another place that people can support the work that I do here or in podcasting or just writing or whatever. Okay. What are we doing? My partner does very well on Patreon. You got to get on it. Yeah, I've never been good at actually posting content on there. I do a lot of work. Like, I do a lot of stuff. I just don't actually like post the stuff that I do on Patreon. It's just a place where people can support the stuff that I do. Thanks again for the support, Gen X Bushy. Thank you. Put the music on there. I guess I should use it more. I should. Thanks again for watching, folks. I'll be back tomorrow. We'll finish out the week strong. Keep scratching my arm. Oh, my itchy arm. Oh, jeez. Showing off my huge muscles. Thank you, Sunny Soul. I appreciate it. And thank you for the gifted subs. I really appreciate that. If you're just lurking and if you're not part of the community as much, please join the Discord server as well before we go. If you're not in the Discord server, you want to get in there. It's really good stuff. Okay. Give my regards to David Tavares. And I'll talk to you tomorrow. Peace.